Across the United States, something deeply unsettling is unfolding in plain sight. In communities that once felt busy and secure, the rhythm is breaking. A for sale sign stays up for weeks, then months. A neighbor moves out and no one replaces them. A house sits dark with a yard that keeps growing because nobody is left to care. And slowly, the story shifts from a housing slowdown to something colder, a loss of confidence, a loss of demand, a quiet unraveling that turns normal neighborhoods into places people avoid. This is not just about prices, it is about what happens when the cost of ownership keeps rising while wages and job security do not. It is about what happens when insurance becomes a second mortgage, when property taxes jump, when utilities punish you for simply living where you live. It is about what happens when the American dream starts to feel like a liability you cannot escape. If you want clear, data-driven breakdowns like this, subscribe to Discover the Nation right now, because the real shifts in housing do not start with headlines. They start with inventory, affordability, and the moment buyers step back all at once. Tonight, we are counting down 10 places where the housing story has turned sharply, and where the next phase could feel less like a correction and more like a rupture.
Number 10. Washington. Washington is a perfect example of how a strong brand can hide weak foundations. For years, the Seattle region felt untouchable. The narrative was simple: tech jobs, high incomes, constant hiring, and an endless line of people willing to pay whatever it took to live close to opportunity. Prices climbed and climbed until numbers that once felt impossible became normal. In parts of King County, the median home price pushed into territory where even high earners had to stretch, gamble, and assume the future would always be stronger than the present. Then, the ground shifted. When the tech sector turns cautious, it does not whisper. It cuts, it freezes, it reorganizes, it tightens remote work, and suddenly the buyer pool that used to feel bottomless starts shrinking. People who plan to move up decide to wait. New buyers look at the monthly payment and walk away. Sellers who expected fast offers discover that the market now demands patience, price cuts, and concessions they never imagined making. Now add the second layer. Washington is not only expensive, it is expensive in a way that keeps compounding. Mortgage rates lifted the payment far beyond what the sticker price suggests. Property taxes rose, maintenance and repair costs climbed, and for many households, the total cost of ownership became the true shock, because the total is what hits the budget every month. That is where the pressure becomes dangerous. When a market is priced on optimism, it cannot handle a sudden absence of it. Buyers do not need to panic, they only need to hesitate. And when they hesitate together, inventory builds, days on market climb, price reductions spread. Then the psychology changes. The buyer starts to believe tomorrow could be cheaper than today. Outside Seattle, the pattern echoes in smaller metros too. Listings rise, activity slows, the gap between what sellers want and what buyers can afford widens. Washington also carries a structural risk that many people ignore, a heavy reliance on sectors that can contract quickly, especially tech and aerospace. When hiring slows in those industries, housing demand does not slowly drift down, it can drop in a single season. So the threat in Washington is not just a softening market, it's a market that was priced for permanent momentum, now learning what it feels like when momentum reverses.
Number 9. Nevada. Nevada is a state that often feels like a mirror of the national economy, only more extreme. When America is confident, Nevada surges. When America pulls back, Nevada feels it first and hardest. For years, Las Vegas became a symbol of fast growth, rapid flips, and investor energy. People treated housing like a game: buy, list, profit, repeat. It worked until the environment changed. Here's the problem with markets powered by speed: they cannot slow down gently. They either keep running or they stumble. When borrowing costs rise, when buyers lose purchasing power, and when tourism-driven income starts to soften, the foundation starts to crack. Nevada does not have the same deep cushion as places with diverse, stable industries. It has an economy that depends heavily on visitors and discretionary spending. And when families across the country cut back, it's not just hotels that feel it. Tips shrink, hours get cut, service workers get squeezed, and that pressure rolls directly into mortgage payments. At the same time, the investor crowd is not loyal. Investors do not stay for the scenery, they stay for the math, and when the math breaks, they exit. That's when listings rise quickly, not because people want to move, but because people need to. Then comes the affordability trap. A median price that looks moderate can still be crushing when rates are high, insurance climbs, and wages do not keep up. Monthly payments become heavy. Buyers stop competing, sellers start reducing, and the market begins to resemble something painfully familiar, a slow-building inventory wave that turns into a flood. Nevada also carries longer-term stress that is becoming impossible to ignore. Water constraints and tighter development realities are changing the long-range outlook, and when uncertainty grows, buyers do what they always do. They pause, they wait, they demand discounts. So Nevada stands in a dangerous position. A state that grew fast on confidence is now facing a period where confidence is harder to find. And in Nevada, when confidence disappears, the lights can still shine, but the financial damage spreads quietly beneath the glow.
Number 8. Utah. Utah spent years as the success story, a fast-growing population, a booming corridor of tech and startups, in a narrative that sounded like permanent acceleration. The Silicon Slopes idea became a badge of pride. Families moved in, builders rushed to meet demand, and prices surged far beyond what local incomes could comfortably support. That is the key. Comfort matters. Because when prices outrun wages, the market becomes fragile, even if it looks strong. It becomes a place where demand depends on perfect conditions, low rates, strong hiring, easy credit, constant migration. The moment one of those pillars weakens, the system starts to wobble. As rates rose, the monthly payment became the wall. Buyers who would have qualified a few years ago suddenly could not. Investors who once loved the growth story saw returns shrink. Listings began to sit longer, builders began to slow projects, and price cuts started to appear more often, not as rare events, but as a routine strategy. Utah also faces the pressure of quality of life issues that are getting louder. Water concerns, air quality episodes, and the reality that rapid growth can make daily life more expensive and more crowded. When the cost of living rises across the board, housing is no longer evaluated in isolation. It becomes one part of a larger equation that starts to feel unsustainable. And that is where the shift becomes serious. If the market depends on constant new arrivals, it cannot tolerate a slowdown in migration. If it depends on tech hiring, it cannot shrug off layoffs. If it depends on confidence, it cannot survive when people start asking a simple question: what if prices do not rise from here? Utah is learning what many boom markets learn eventually. Growth can be real and still produce a bubble if the pricing assumes perfection forever.
Number 7. Louisiana. Louisiana is not just fighting an economic cycle, it is fighting a multi-front pressure that turns housing into a daily stress test. Even when median prices look lower than coastal hotspots, the true cost of ownership can become overwhelming because of the surrounding expenses. Insurance is the headline here, and it is not a small headline. When premiums jump dramatically and providers pull back, the market changes at the foundation level. Buyers hesitate because they cannot predict the real monthly cost. Sellers struggle because buyers cannot secure coverage at a reasonable price. Entire neighborhoods can become harder to finance, harder to sell, and harder to maintain. Then add the environmental reality. Storm damage, flooding risk, heat, and humidity do not just affect comfort. They affect repair costs. They affect maintenance cycles. They affect whether a homeowner can keep up without sliding into debt. Louisiana also faces population pressure in parts of the state. When communities lose residents, demand weakens and listings linger. When demand weakens, sellers cut prices. When sellers cut prices, homeowners who bought near peak value feel trapped. They cannot sell without taking a loss, but staying means paying rising costs year after year, and that is how housing stops being a dream and becomes a burden. This is why Louisiana can look affordable from a distance and still be one of the most vulnerable housing environments. The risk is not only falling prices, the risk is a market with the mechanics of ownership start breaking down. If you're still watching, subscribe, because this countdown is not about fear, it's about understanding where the pressure points are before they turn into crises that catch people off guard. Number 6. Arizona. Arizona sold a powerful promise: sunshine, space, and a lifestyle that felt easier than the high-cost coastal states. For a while, it worked. People moved in, builders expanded, prices climbed, and many households believed they had found a more affordable version of the good life. Then the hidden costs got louder. Utility bills began to surge, especially during brutal summers. Water concerns moved from background anxiety to policy reality. Restrictions tightened, costs rose, and as the climate becomes more extreme, the cost of living becomes more volatile. Now connect that to housing. When mortgage rates rise, the payment rises. When insurance becomes more expensive, the payment rises. When utilities climb, the total monthly burden rises again. And eventually, buyers stop looking at the purchase price and start asking what the monthly life will actually cost. That question is dangerous for a market that grew quickly, because Arizona's growth story was powered by migration. When people stop moving in at the same pace, demand softens. When demand softens, inventory builds. When inventory builds, price cuts spread. Then psychology shifts. Buyers wait. Sellers chase. The market loses its heat. There's also a demographic angle that matters. Arizona attracted retirees and remote workers. When confidence changes, these groups can move again. And when a large wave of owners decides to list at the same time, supply can rise fast. Arizona is still growing in many ways, but the housing environment is becoming a harsher equation. Not only what a home costs, but what it costs to keep, cool, insure, and maintain in a future that feels hotter, tighter, and more uncertain every year. Number 5. Colorado. Colorado became a symbol of lifestyle wealth, mountain views, outdoor identity, and a sense that buying there meant buying into a permanent premium. Remote work accelerated that story. High earners arrived, investors followed, prices pushed higher, and for a while it felt like the market had discovered a new level that would never be challenged. But markets do not escape gravity. When rates rise, even wealthy buyers pause. When buyers pause, luxury listings stack up. When luxury listings stack up, sellers reduce. And when reductions begin at the top, they can roll downward through the broader market. Colorado also faces a cost of living surge that hits residents from every direction. Taxes, utilities, and the everyday expense of living in popular areas can become a constant pressure. Renters feel it, owners feel it, and when vacancy rises, investors feel it too. Tourism and seasonal patterns add another layer. When wildfire seasons intensify, when snowfall becomes less predictable, and when travel budgets tighten, the state's economy can feel the tremors. And if the economy weakens, the ability of buyers to sustain high housing costs weakens with it. The key risk for Colorado is that it became priced for an ideal version of itself, a version where demand is always strong, where incomes always rise, where migration always continues, and where lifestyle premiums never get questioned. But in reality, premiums are fragile when affordability breaks. Colorado does not have to collapse overnight to create damage. It only needs to lose the belief that prices are guaranteed to rise. Once that belief fades, the market can slide faster than people expect. Number 4. Hawaii. Hawaii is the clearest example of paradise turning into a financial trap. The view is stunning, the marketing is perfect, and the dream is powerful. But for residents, the math has become brutal. When home prices rise far beyond local incomes, ownership becomes less like a goal and more like a locked door. And when the economy relies heavily on tourism, any slowdown in global travel can hit demand quickly. Hawaii also carries an unavoidable reality. Everything costs more. Materials, repairs, food, fuel, and labor. That means maintenance is not a small detail. It is a constant expense that grows over time. And when insurance climbs because of weather risk, coastal vulnerability, and disaster exposure, the burden becomes even heavier. Now add a quiet shift that changes the culture. When local residents leave because they cannot afford to stay, communities lose stability. When absentee ownership rises, neighborhoods can feel less alive. Properties sit empty. The market becomes distorted, not by families building lives, but by wealth moving in and out like a tide. Hawaii can still look strong in photos, while the local reality deteriorates. And this is why Hawaii is fragile. It is not simply expensive, it is expensive in a way that squeezes residents from every angle, leaving little room for error. If the broader economy weakens, Hawaii does not gently adjust, it can contract quickly, because the buyer base that supports the highest prices is often the first to pause when uncertainty rises.
Number 3, California. California remains ground zero for the modern American housing crisis. It is the state that combined massive demand, limited supply, high incomes, and extreme cost pressures into one volatile mix. For decades, the dream was powerful: sunshine, opportunity, and status, but the dream has become expensive enough to break itself. The price-to-income gap widened until it stopped feeling like a stretch and started feeling impossible. First-time buyers got locked out, renters got trapped, families began leaving. And when enough people leave, demand weakens in subtle ways that do not show up immediately, but eventually become visible in inventory and days on market. California's burden is not only housing, it is the entire cost of living ecosystem: utilities, insurance, taxes, and the everyday price of survival. Add in wildfire risk, drought stress, and insurance pullbacks in high-risk regions, and housing becomes complicated to finance and complicated to keep. Then there's the corporate shift. When employers expand elsewhere, when remote work flexibility shrinks, and when high earners decide they can live cheaper in another state, California loses the very demand that once kept prices floating. Price cuts become common. Listings linger longer, investors become cautious, and the psychology starts to change. People stop believing the market always comes back fast. California will remain a major economic engine, but its housing system is carrying too many fractures at once. If another economic shock arrives, the pressure could move quickly through the system because the affordability buffer is already gone for millions of households. Number 2, Texas. Texas was marketed as the escape plan: lower taxes, more space, more growth, and a promise that the math would work better than the coastal states. During the boom, it looked like a miracle. People flooded in, builders raced to keep up, investors poured money into fast-growing metros, prices surged. Then the hidden cost story emerged. Property taxes rose, insurance climbed, utilities surged under intense heat, and the total monthly cost began to shock families who thought they were buying affordability. Texas also built at scale, and scale is a double-edged sword. When demand is strong, it looks like momentum. When demand weakens, it looks like overbuilding. Inventory rises, sellers compete, price cuts spread. Then the story flips from growth to glut. The risk in Texas is that it depended on two assumptions: constant migration and manageable living costs. When migration slows, the demand side softens. When living costs rise, the affordability promise breaks. And when both happen together, the market becomes vulnerable, even if headline prices still look reasonable compared with California. Texas is not one market, it is many, but the big metros share the same stress: rapid price growth, rising ownership costs, and a buyer pool that is no longer willing to overpay when the monthly payment is high and the future feels uncertain. If you are getting value from this breakdown, subscribe now. The next place on this list is the one that has become the clearest warning sign of what happens when insurance, inventory, and affordability collide: Number 1. Florida. Florida is where the housing dream collided hardest with the cost of reality. For years, Florida felt unstoppable. People moved in rapidly, demand surged, prices climbed. The narrative was sunshine, freedom, and a lifestyle upgrade. But as the market moved into the next phase, the true cost of owning in Florida rose like a tide that never stopped. Insurance is the center of the storm. When premiums jump dramatically, when providers pull back, and when coverage becomes difficult or extremely expensive, the market changes at its foundation. Buyers cannot plan. Sellers cannot close deals easily. Owners get trapped in homes they cannot afford to keep because selling means competing in a market where buyers are cautious and the cost burden is obvious. Then comes property taxes, utilities, and the growing climate expense. Flooding risk, hurricane risk, heat, and coastal vulnerability are no longer abstract. They show up in bills, repairs, and restrictions. They show up in whether a home can be insured affordably. They show up in whether a family can hold on when one unexpected expense hits. At the same time, inventory has been rising in many areas. More listings, more competition, more price reductions, longer time on market. That combination is the early signal of a power shift from sellers to buyers. And Florida's problem is that the costs surrounding ownership can stay high even if the sale price drops. That creates a brutal situation where values soften, but monthly costs remain punishing. Florida is also vulnerable to sentiment swings. When the migration wave slows, demand weakens. When demand weakens in a state that built and sold aggressively, listings pile up. And when listings pile up, the market can turn faster than people expect. Florida can still look like paradise from the outside. The beaches still shine, the sunsets still sell the dream. But inside the housing numbers, a different truth is emerging. For many owners, the dream is becoming financial quicksand because the cost to stay keeps rising, even as the market stops rewarding them. And that is the deeper warning of this countdown. Housing does not break only when prices fall. Housing breaks when the total cost becomes unlivable and the exit becomes difficult. If you want more clear, data-driven breakdowns like this, subscribe to Discover the Nation, because in the next videos, we will map where inventory is rising fastest, where price cuts are spreading, and where the cost of ownership is quietly rewriting the future of American housing.